All right, so in this video, I'm going to go through the solutions to the IB Economics Higher Level Paper 1. This is the November 2023 edition, I guess. And specifically, we're going to be looking at question 3. So in previous videos, I had already done questions 1 and 2. So if you want to check those out, please go right ahead. But in this video, we're going to look at question 3, which is this guy over here. So 2 parts. Part A is asking us to explain how specialization according to comparative advantage leads to beneficial international trade. And the second part, Part B, is asking us to use real-world examples to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of trading blocks. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll tackle this first bit, Part A, which is asking us to explain how specialization according to comparative advantage leads to beneficial international trade. So question 3 is really all about trade. So you should only select this question if trade is your thing and you know the area well. The good news is that if you do know your trade theory pretty well, then this is quite an easy question. We simply have to talk about comparative advantage, specialization, and how that results in this thing called the gains from trade, which is pretty much basic trade theory. And to answer this question, we'll start off with some key terms, then we'll use a diagram, and we're specifically going to use this thing called a trade diagram. Next, we're going to do some theory and explanation, and finally finish off with a quick summary. So, okay, so in terms of keywords or key definitions, there's the 3 key terms that I've identified. These are comparative advantage, specialization, and international trade. So if you look closely at the question itself, we've got specialization, got comparative advantage, and we have international trade. So I think these are 3 important concepts that we should probably define right at the beginning. So let's jump straight into it. So the first one, in terms of comparative advantage, well, this occurs when a country can produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another country. It forms the basis of trade, as countries benefit by specializing in goods where they have a comparative advantage and trading for goods where they have a comparative disadvantage. Okay, so that's the first term, comparative advantage, and I think it should be occurs, not because. So if you have any sort of knowledge of trade theory, or if you study this area at all, then you should pretty much know what comparative advantage is. It's sort of like the very first thing that you get taught in trade theory. Okay, so second term here is specialization, and this refers to the process where individuals, firms, or countries focus on producing specific goods or services in which they have a comparative advantage, rather than trying to produce everything themselves. Okay, so that's what specialization means. So essentially, you do what you're good at, I do what I'm good at, and this is how we're going to create the surplus, which we can then trade. And the final bit is, the final key word that we need to define here is international trade. International trade is the exchange of goods and services across national borders. It allows countries to obtain products they do not produce efficiently, while exporting those they can produce at a lower opportunity cost. So we want to make sure that we put in or insert as many of those important keywords as possible. So I want to mention things like opportunity costs. I want to mention things like exchange of goods and services. These are all sort of important concepts that we need to mention when we are defining our key terms. Okay, so let's move on to the meat of the question, which is down here. We're going to do a diagram. And okay, so here we're going to use a trade diagram. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with a production possibilities table, which you see here right in front of us. And you can just make this up. I've just hypothetically, just for the purposes of illustration, what I've done here is I've started with two countries, A and B, and we have two goods, wheat and cars. Each country will have a comparative advantage in one good. Then we're going to demonstrate how these countries specialize according to the comparative advantages, then engage in international trade, and they're actually going to be able to consume beyond their PPC, which is not possible if they didn't trade. Okay, so that's kind of the objective here. So let's start off by setting the story up. You can do it whatever way you want, but this is the way I've decided to do it. I've sort of gone two countries, A and B, two goods, wheat and cars, but you can do, whatever. You can use specifically any two countries you want. You can use, the U.S. and China. You can do, whatever country works for you, and you can pick on whatever two goods you like. It doesn't have to be wheat and cars, but it's almost irrelevant. It's really, the point is just to get the theory across. Consider two countries. Country A has a comparative advantage in producing cars, while country B has a comparative advantage in producing wheat. Let's fix this up a little bit. Okay. The following table depicts the production possibilities for each country in a given period. Okay, so we've got this table, hypothetically, so country A can make like 50 tons of wheat if it were to use all of its resources, and country B can, and country A can either make 50 tons of wheat, or it can produce like 100 units of cars, anything in between, and country B does like the opposite. Furthermore, assume that one car can be traded for 1 ton of wheat in international markets. The following diagram depicts the production possibilities curves for both countries without international trade and the consumption possibilities with international trade. So in this next paragraph, we're going to kind of set up the, the international rate of, the international sort of trade rules, like, how much you can trade one item for the other. So for simplicity, I've just gone 1 car can be traded for 1 wheat, or 1 ton of wheat. So I'm just going to keep things nice and easy like that. Okay, next we're going to draw these diagrams. I'm going to start by going this. No, actually, don't want that too much. I'm going to go start off by saying, okay, we'll label this like country A. Call this wheat, and we'll label this like cars, and we'll do the same thing for country B. So these are the PPCs, the production possibilities curves. Wheat and cars, and A is going to have like 50 maximum production of 50 wheat and a maximum production of 100 cars. So that's going to be their PPC. So we'll label that PPC for country A. And country B is going to be the opposite. They can produce like 100 wheat and 50 cars. That's going to be the, a bit wonky there. And this is the PPC for country B. Now, if they were to trade, then remember, 1 wheat can trade for 1 car. So if country A were to export 100% of their cars, they could, in theory, import 100 tons of wheat. So that's going to be we'll call this like CPF, which is the consumption possibilities frontier for country A. And I'll call this, and we'll do the same thing for country B. So country B, if they wanted to, they can export 100 tons of wheat and in exchange import 100 tons of cars. So that's the consumption possibilities frontier for country B and anything in between. And down here, we're just going to have, let's make sure we have some, just a bit of text to properly label the diagram. So I've gone, PPCAs for the production possibilities curve for country A, PPCB represents the production possibilities curve for country B, CPFA is the consumption possibilities frontier for A, and so on. Okay, so next we're going to have to have a little bit of explanation, just a tiny bit of exposition to explain these two diagrams. If each country specializes in the good for which it has a comparative advantage, total production increases, leading to gains from trade. With trade, country A could, in theory, export 100 cars in exchange for 100 tons of wheat. Therefore, its maximum potential wheat consumption is doubled compared to the non-trade scenario. Similarly, country B could, in theory, export 100 tons of wheat in exchange for 100 cars. Therefore, its maximum potential car consumption is also doubled compared to the non-trade scenario. Yeah, so you'd have something to explain to that effect. You could say, again, you could pick any two things. It doesn't have to be cars and wheat. Could be, could be apples and oranges, whatever. As long as you're demonstrating that if you specialize, you're going to be able to create a surplus, and then you trade in order to get those things that you can't, that you don't really produce that well. And what you end up with is you're able to consume above the PPC, which is technically not possible if you didn't trade, right? Because anything outside the PPC is actually considered to be infeasible. So we'd finish off by saying something like, in both countries, the consumption possibilities frontier lies above their respective production possibilities curve, indicating that with specialization and trade, both countries could consume above the constraints of their PPC, thus enjoying mutual benefits. Okay, so so what we're saying here is that if you didn't have trade, each country would be stuck at their respective PPCs, and you know that you can't consume outside your PPC because that's the infeasible area. However, with trade, each country could specialize according to comparative advantage, create a surplus, then trade the surplus to get the stuff they don't make. In this case, country A would specialize in cars and import wheat, while country B would do the opposite. In this way, they would end up consuming outside the PPC, which is initially impossible. So this is basically what we call the gains from trade, and it's a sort of very basic type of setup for trade theory. Now, in this next section, we're going to explain some of the key benefits from specialization and trade, and these include things like economies of scale, higher standards of living, stronger diplomatic ties, and all that sort of good stuff. Specialization ensures that resources, labor, capital, and land are used where they are most productive, leading to higher efficiency and output. Increased efficiency reduces production costs, leading to lower prices for consumers and a higher global supply of goods, boosting economic welfare. That's the second benefit, is that you end up with lower cost and greater output. Third benefit is that you end up with access to a wider variety of goods and services. Trade allows countries to obtain products they cannot efficiently produce domestically, expanding consumer choices. For example, Australia imports electronics from China while exporting iron ore. Another benefit of trade is that it leads to job creation and economic growth. Specialization drives employment in industries where countries have a comparative advantage, fostering investment and innovation. For example, Vietnam's textile industry and South Korea's technology sector have generated millions of jobs and contributed to economic expansion. Another benefit from trade is that you end up with economies of scale. Access to international markets allows firms to produce in larger quantities, lowering costs per unit and increasing competitiveness. Another benefit of trade is that it allows for technology transfer and innovation. Trade facilitates the exchange of ideas, innovations, and best practices, accelerating technological advancements across industries. So this is a kind of like a laundry list of all these benefits. You don't really have to do every single one, but I'm just giving like a super comprehensive list. You could probably do like 3 or 4, and that'll be sufficient. Trade also allows access to markets and resources. Businesses can reach global consumers while sourcing raw materials unavailable domestically, enhancing production capabilities. Trade can also lead to higher standards of living, increased income, lower prices, and access to advanced technologies improve quality of life. For example, Singapore has achieved a high standard of living through trade specialization in finance and shipping. And lastly, one of the final benefits of trade is that it leads to stronger diplomatic and economic ties. Trade fosters cooperation, strengthens international relationships, and reduces the likelihood of conflicts between nations. So very relevant in the current global climate. If countries traded more, then they'd be less likely to go to war with each other. Okay, so just to finish up, we're going to provide a short summary to sum up our argument. Specialization based on comparative advantage allows countries to trade efficiently, leading to increased global output, lower prices, and higher economic growth. While international trade offers numerous benefits, ensuring fair and balanced trade policies is crucial to maximize its advantage for all economies. Okay, so something short and sweet, that will suffice. Right, let's move on to the second part of this question, part B. So in part B, we've been asked to use real-world examples to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of trading blocks. Okay, so this question is a little bit more open-ended. So if you like essay-type questions and being able to build an argument, then this is your type of question. As usual, we'll start with some key terms or concepts, then move on to a diagram. And I think a tariff diagram would be really useful here. Next, we're going to go through a list of advantages and disadvantages, since that's what the question is asking. And finally, finish up with a short summary. So regarding the key terms, there's really only one thing we need to define, and that is this idea of a trading block. So a trading block. Now, with this concept, there are a few different forms of trading block, so we need to be clear and explain those as well. So for trading block, a trading bloc is a group of countries that agree to reduce or eliminate trade barriers, such as tariffs and quotas, among member nations while maintaining restrictions on non-members. They come in different forms, including so we can have these different types of trading blocks, things like free trade areas or FTAs, customs unions, common markets, and economic and monetary unions. So with a free trade area or an FTA, members eliminate trade barriers among themselves but maintain independent external trade policies. Under a customs union, members eliminate internal trade barriers and adopt a common external tariff. With a common market, in addition to a customs union, it allows the free movement of labor and capital. So these are sort of like they go up in the level of interdependency, I suppose. And lastly, with an economic and monetary union, a common market with a shared currency and unified economic policy. For example, the Eurozone. Yeah, so these sort of trading blocks they start at the low level like FTAs, and then they move up in terms of how complex they are and how interdependent the nations are until you get to an economic and monetary union, for example, like the Eurozone. Okay, I think that'll do it for the key terms. Next, we're going to use a pretty kind of standard tariff diagram. Here, we're going to build a case for being in a trading block as it would reduce tariffs. Now, when you implement a tariff, you end up with all these yucky outcomes for the consumer. Specifically, consumers end up losing a whole ton of consumer surplus. What you end up with are some redistributive effects as domestic producers get some of those surpluses, and the government collects a whole bunch of tax revenue in the process as well. What's bad for society, though, is the creation of these deadweight losses, which are those nasty bits which doesn't really benefit anyone and are simply lost through the tariff. So when you enter a trading block, you reduce those tariffs and you kind of reverse all those disadvantages from putting the tariff on in the first place. Namely, it benefits consumers because you get back all those consumer surpluses, and society as a whole benefits because you're able to recover those deadweight losses. Okay, so I'm going to start by hope I've got enough space here. Start by drawing like a tariff diagram. So here we've got price and quantity as usual. Let's say we've got some sort of supply curve. That's a domestic supply curve. And we have some kind of domestic demand curve for whatever this thing is. Then we have like the world price. We'll call this like PW. What have I got here? P world. And yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and use red or something. I've got some like P world plus tariff. So this is what the world price would be if you added tariffs on. And so we start by going and then we dot in these areas over here. And next we're going to label these different areas. We'll call this area A, B, C, and D. Yeah, so that's kind of a pretty standard kind of tariff diagram. You can see that if you were to implement, so consumer surplus before the tariff, before tariff is this like nice kind of big area, and then once you put the tariff on, consumer surplus is going to shrink into this smaller area. So consumer surplus will shrink by the areas A plus B plus C and D. And then what you do is when you take the tariff off, you're able to recover those areas. So A is what we call the producer is the redistributive effect. C is the tariff revenue, and areas B and D are these deadweight losses. So now we've got the diagram sorted. We need to put some commentary around this. The imposition of a tariff would reduce consumer surplus by the areas A plus B plus C plus D. I nearly got it there. C, consumer surplus. Area A represents the gain in producer surplus domestic firms would enjoy from the tariff protection. Area C represents the tax revenue that is collected by the government. Areas B and D represent a deadweight loss to society. All right, so producer surplus area A. Okay. Yeah, that's close enough. Conversely, the removal of a tariff would see consumer surplus grow by the areas A plus B plus C plus D. Therefore, if a trading bloc results in tariff reduction, consumers in member states would benefit. Furthermore, society as a whole would also benefit as the deadweight loss is able to be recovered. Okay, so that about sums it up for this bit. We can move on to the next bit, which looks at some of the specific advantages and disadvantages of being in a trading bloc. So here we've got a whole bunch of advantages and disadvantages. These trading blocks are far from perfect, and they come with their own potential list of problems as well. So let's kick off with the advantages. So the first main advantage that I can see of being in a trading bloc is that it leads to trade creation and increased efficiency. Lower tariffs between member states allow countries to specialize based on comparative advantage, leading to greater economic efficiency and lower prices for consumers. For example, the EU has allowed countries like Germany to specialize in automobiles, while Spain focuses on tourism and agriculture. So that's the first advantage. It's like, with trade, with the trading block, you do what you're good at, I do what I'm good at, and we're going to specialize, and everyone's going to be better off. The second sort of main advantage is that it allows greater market access and economies of scale. Businesses benefit from access to a larger consumer base, increasing sales and enabling economies of scale. For example, the European single market gives firms access to over 450 million consumers, allowing companies like Airbus to grow through cross-border production. The third major benefit of a trading bloc is that it allows free movement of labor. Workers can move freely within the bloc, helping labor shortages and improving wages in high-demand industries. For example, Polish workers migrating to the UK under EU freedom of movement policies contributed to economic growth. The fourth benefit of a trading bloc is that it allows for stronger bargaining power in global trade. A trading bloc negotiates as a single entity, giving it stronger influence in multilateral trade agreements. For example, the EU's collective bargaining power has led to more favorable deals with China and the US compared to individual European nations negotiating separately. The fifth benefit I've got listed here is that it leads to political stability and cooperation. Economic interdependence reduces the risk of conflicts between member states and strengthens political alliances. For example, the EU was formed partly to foster peace among European nations post World War II, contributing to decades of stability. And the last sort of major advantage I've got here is that trading blocs or being members of a trading bloc can lead to higher standards of living and economic growth. Increased trade, investment, and employment within the bloc contribute to higher GDP growth and improved quality of life. For example, ASEAN countries Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam have seen rapid growth through regional trade integration. Okay, so that about does for the list of advantages. Now, in terms of some of these disadvantages, as I mentioned before, the trading blocs are not perfect. They also come with the list of problems. So one of the first disadvantages is that it leads to trade diversion. When a country shifts imports from a more efficient external producer to a less efficient trading bloc member due to external tariffs, it can lead to higher costs. For example, the UK faced higher food prices after joining the EU in 1973 due to tariffs on cheaper non-EU agricultural imports. The second sort of major problem or disadvantage of a trading bloc, as far as I can see, is this idea of the loss in sovereignty. So a country kind of loses a bit of its own control to self-determine. Countries in deeper trading blocs, customs unions, and economic unions must align with common policies, reducing national control over trade and regulations. For example, the UK's Brexit vote in 2016 was partly driven by concerns over the loss of sovereignty under EU rules. And the sort of final disadvantage of a trading bloc is that it can sort of challenge sort of global free trade agreements. Trading blocs can make multilateral trade negotiations more difficult as blocs impose common external tariffs on non-members. For example, the rise in regional trade agreements has slowed progress in WTO-led global free trade negotiations. Sorry about that. The thing sort of went a bit wonky. But yeah, so it's there. All right, so let's summarize. While trading blocks have drawbacks such as trade diversion and reduced sovereignty, their benefits, increased trade, employment, and economic stability, often outweigh the disadvantages, especially for nations with strong industries and export potential. However, the effectiveness of a trading bloc depends on how well it is managed and whether policies align with national economic goals. Okay, so I think that's a neat little summary just to finish off this question. So as I mentioned, this third and final question is all about trade. So if trade's your thing, then you want to go with this type of question. But yeah, I kind of think that trade, I've noticed kind of these trade questions to be quite straightforward as well. So it kind of pays to perhaps sort of, specialize and be knowledgeable in this particular area. All right, so yeah, that about does it for this particular video, and that wraps it up for the first question of paper one of this 2023 November paper. I'll obviously do the other papers in follow-up videos. See you guys in the next one. Hope you found this one useful. Bye.